The revolution is lit.
Uhuru comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday study featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela. My name is Akile Anai, the Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. Today's study is highly important, and we encourage you right now to invite your friends and family to it. This week, Chairman Omali Yeshitela continues the study of the book, Reparations Now, Abbreviated Report from the International Tribunal on Reparations for Black People in the U.S. He starts on the bottom of the page 11 at the next witness. For the first hour, Chairman will review the study materials, and in the second hour, we will open it up to you, our live viewers, to ask your questions. It's my honor now to introduce our leadership, the leader of the African nation and the worldwide African Revolution, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru, thank you so much, Comrade Director Akile. I want to welcome everybody here for the study on this morning. And I know you can't see this too well, but this is the book Reparations Now that we are reading from. This is something that the party published in 1982. This is, as it was just stated, an abbreviated report on the tribunal, International Tribunal on Reparations for African People in the United States. And this was the beginning of a real mass movement for reparations in this country that did not exist before. That is not to say people were not talking about reparations, there were not organizations doing reparations work before. But it was the African People's Socialist Party that made a decision that the reparations question had to become a mass question, had to become a property of the African people if it were going to ever be a legitimate demand, if it was ever going to be anything that had any possibility of being realized in the real world. We also decided that reparations had to be a function of the revolution. It was we wanted to make it a mass demand. We wanted to everybody in every group and every class within the African world to unite with the demand for reparations, but we understood that it was going to have to be something that masses of people in different organizations raise it, and it opens the door for the revolutionary achievement of reparations. And you can study what that means. So we also, before the party's involvement in reparations movement and turning it into a mass movement, it was not a mass movement, as I said before. And it was assumed that the question of reparations only dealt with the issue of slavery. And what we did and what this tribunal helped to show is that the issue of reparations and the theft of the value from African people has even got greater subsequent to the end of slavery. So we're not just talking about something that happened during slavery time. We're talking about the whole history of this relationship, and we actually quantified at that moment poorly, but the first time in history there was an actual quantification of the amount of value stolen from African people in the form of labor alone inside the United States. And so that was an amazing kind of development that we brought to this question of reparations. I know you can't see this well, but I'll show this. I'll put it up just in case. I mean, this is like a picture that's on the inside of the cover of the Reparations Now book. It is a picture of the hall or the stage from the back of the hall where this reparations tribunal occurred. So I just want to share this with you. Up to now, we've been reading. We've read the introduction that was written by me. This was the tribunal happened on November 13th and 14th, I think it was, in 1982. And the issue of the Burning Spear newspaper, which is published by our party, as you know, December 1982, carried an article on it. We went through that article. We're going through that article, but we did the introduction that was written in 1983, and then, but we went through the Burning Spear article. We're reading that now, and in the Burning Spear article, we recount what had occurred at the tribunal. We talked about first the first witness that presented at the tribunal was Dr. Leonard Jeffries. In fact, this was the Leonard Jeffries' real introduction to the world, as helped him to be renowned to the extent that he is now. Dr. John Henry Clark was supposed to have been there, and for some reason, and I can't remember now, it may have been health, and he sent Leonard Jeffries. Jeffries made that presentation, and it was an extraordinary presentation, perhaps one of the best he's ever done. The basis of his presentation for the perspective of the tribunal process, first of all, was to show that a crime had occurred, that African people were better off before the attack on Africa by Europe that resulted in the transatlantic slave trade and our forced dispersal at gunpoint to the various places of the world, including the United States itself. So Jeffries did an extraordinary job on that. And then following Jeffries, we heard from Gwen Wilson of the National Black United Front. And then following Gwen Wilson, Professor Del Hunter of Medgar Evers College on the City University of New York, who gave testimony about the whole issue of education and what has happened to Africans around that question in the United States. And then there was Job Mashariki, dear comrade, who was the chairman of the Black Veterans for Social Justice, who talked about how African people had participated in all these wars fighting for white power, but had declared that blacks fight no wars no more for anybody else. So now we were at a place where we were about to discuss the participation of another comrade, and we start on the bottom of page 11, and we said the next witness was African revolutionary health activist Ebun Adelona. Sister Adelona pointed out forcefully the ways health is too often neglected or looked at from a narrow perspective. She stated, quote, "We are involved in the struggle for the health of the people, and we see the struggle for health as one of the most basic and fundamental, because if you do not have a people that are healthy, you do not have a people that can engage in any kind of struggle in any of the areas that we struggle in. We cannot wage a liberation struggle without a people that are healthy. You cannot wage an armed struggle if you're not able to take care of the health of the people. You cannot in any way move forward if you're not dealing with health." And comrade, this is unquote, comrade Adelona proceeded to bring forth the most extensive documentation of the health status of African people in New York and throughout the US, in order to demonstrate further our right to reparations. She pointed out that for African women, negative pregnancy outcomes are highest, and infant mortality rate are at least 36% higher than whites. In many cases, African activists have had to carry out independent research, block by block studies, to uncover the causes of African health oppression. Often, such studies reveal the relations between health status and the environment. For instance, studies on the high asthma rates for African children suggest an association with a high incidence of roaches in apartments rented to Africans, and an allergic reaction to roach droppings in the children. Studies of people who freeze to death in the winter require extensive work, since the Department of Health in New York masked such tragedies by listing the cause of death as heart failure. She testified about the ways that the multi-billion-dollar health industry and the government are conspiring to provide less services to Africans while concentrated on the lucrative white middle-class market, thus pushing the African population below the survival level, meaning genocide. For instance, bankruptcies in hospitals are the result of government pulling back funding sources. Of the 48 hospitals closing nationally this year, 39 served a predominantly Black population. Of the $10.7 billion spent in New York City for medical facilities in 1980, more than 50% went to support a little string of hospitals in the wealthy East Side. In Manhattan, the city closed Sydenham Hospital in Harlem because it was allegedly operating at a deficit. You don't hear the term deficit in relation to the mammoth police department budget. Carmen Alalona pointed out the ways struggle to save Sydenham Hospital had documented the state's complicity in genocide. This and the other hospital closings mean death for African people, paved the way for gentrification of African neighborhoods by killing off the inhabitants and create a captive population which must act at the will of the government planners. African people are in a struggle to get decent health care for our people who are breaking from the ideological definitions of health processes which have evolved by capitalism in the pursuit of profit. Much more documentation was provided in written form, including the important areas of mental health, sterilization, and abortion rights. So this is part of what this tribunal is bringing out. And the fact is that in many instances, we find ourselves aware of this or that health-related contradiction, but we seldom have an opportunity to have it all pulled together so that we can look at it and see how it relates to our entire conditions of existence. So I had Dr. Jeffries, he talks about how life for African people, and this is a fundamental question, how life for African people has been on the descent as a consequence of the invasion of Africa by Europe, starting Portugal in particular, in 1415, where they began this whole process of capturing Africans and pushing us into what would become the system of capitalism, capitalist profit, and turning Africa. This is the beginning of the process that turned Africa into what Karl Marx called a warren for the commercial hunting of Black skins, and actually place entire continent for the purpose of creating and producing captives who would be sold off or worked sometimes to death, often to death on the continent itself. This is the process of the emergence of white power, the emergence of the capitalist system, and that's being documented through this process. It's really important to do this. It's important the whole issue of the tribunal, because as I mentioned earlier, the reparations issue was not a big issue. There were certain nationalists who were grappling with this question and had begun things like trying to get legislators or come up with ways to take it into some kind of court, whether that was local, meaning US based, or some kind of international court to get the perhaps the United Nations or some other body to hear this question. But the idea of taking this question to the masses of the people and proving it publicly, the demand for reparations. So it's not something that's simply talked about by handfuls of people without some participation. And the masses of people in general were not involved in this discussion at all. There was no discussion. So we declared that we were going to make reparations a household word, that we had to bring the mass of the people into this process so that the people could take possession of the demand for reparations, and that would be the determining factor of whether reparations would occur or not. And we decided that the tribunal would be a means by which we could do that. We can bring in experts who can talk about this question. We can bring in expert testimony, and we can actually begin a process of quantifying the amount of value that has been stolen from African people. And this is just in labor alone. And so that's what this tribunal was about, and was to help African people ourselves come together, because too often we know of our stories individually, but African people ourselves come together and collectively come to an understanding about what the hell was happening and had been happening, and the Reparations Tribunal offered us this opportunity. So this was a really important development. So we say that, unfortunately, Dr. John Bowling, director of the Mandela Center, and member of the Association of Black Psychiatrists, was forced to leave for other commitments when the tribunal testimony was running late. Unable to testify, Dr. Bowling submitted his testimony in writing on the effects of oppression in the US on African psychology. This is, as we said, an abbreviated report. Comrade Director Akile, who is hosting this discussion on the day, is also the director of the African People's Socialist Party's Department of Agitation and Propaganda, and her office has custody of much of the testimony that happened. And while we had planned shortly after this presentation, shortly after the tribunal, to pull together a much larger volume, including much more of the testimony. It didn't happen then, but by mid-2021, we expect to be putting out a larger volume that has much more of the testimony here. And you will hear testimony coming from various places, or you will hear of testimony coming from various areas of the country, because what the party did was we organized committees and where we could in Florida, in California, in New York, and some other places, where people, the party members, would actually host meetings and pull together sectors of the population in those places, sometimes to bring their own testimony to the tribunal. And we mobilized people into New York, and we did that in New York as well, as part of this whole tribunal process. So the last witness to appear before the International Tribunal on Saturday was Mafunde Lake, one of the founders of the heroic Inmates for Action in Atmore and Holman prisons in Alabama, and a longtime African prison resistor. Brother Mafunde came forward and remarked that this was the first time he had ever been before a judge when he wasn't on trial himself. He then proceeded to recount through personal experience the damning proof that prison functions as a form of genocide, that it serves the same function as those terroristic slave drivers known as nigger breakers, because they were assigned the responsibility of breaking the will and resistance of Africans who would not submit to slavery. He exposed the ways the prisons of Alabama and in the rest of the US used terroristic violence and isolation to break the spirit. Mafundi himself served 13 years of a 13-year sentence for a $38 robbery he did not commit. If I'm not mistaken, Mafundi was a teenager when he was sent to prison in Alabama. In all, he showed how the prisons represent extensive behavioral modification centers based on crude techniques of reward and punishment. This whole thing about behavior modification, it's like psychological warfare that's been waged against African people who are caged. And this has been something that's happening historically, and it was really concentrated in the prison system. And as Mafundi said, that served as a part of the role of nigger breaking, to break the spirit, break the morale, break the connection that people have with our own community and our own humanity. That's part of what this process was. Comrade Mafundi also brought out the ways Africans have managed to fight back. Excuse me, comrades. Comrade Mafundi also brought out the ways Africans have managed to fight back. In Atmore, the African prisoners formed Inmates for Action, the IFA, which was both a military resistance formation committed to establishing conditions in which Africans could survive by threatening and taking retaliatory measures against guards and white lackeys, as well as being a political and cultural formation which would raise the consciousness and sense of purpose among African prisoners. IFA proved to be the strongest prison formation in the South and organized work stoppages, as well as ending the degrading yes sir, no sir stance that African prisoners had been forced to take with the guards. Finally, with the overall decline of the Black Power movement in the 1970s because of government military assault, the prison authorities were able to break down IFA. They transferred leaders like Mafundi out of the prison and brutally murdered many others, such as Frank X. Moore. Those who took up the struggle in Atmore and Holman, however, have not been entirely wiped out, and struggling African people keep coming back. Although prison leaves physical and mental scars on all Africans who have been subjected to it, it also educates our people to the terms and seriousness of the struggle. International judge, this is one of the judges, Samba Mbou, who is from Senegal, living in France at that time. International judge Samba Mbou asked Mafundi about the use of prisoners as involuntary laborers. Mafundi pointed out that that Atmore prison, for example, is a multi-million-dollar agricultural industry, producing all types of farm products, which are marketed by capitalist businesses, even though the prisoners get to eat none of the fresh food produced. Kasim Ashbourne of the Black American Law Student Association, who was one of the observers, official observers at the tribunal, asked if Mafundi tried to organize in his more recent period in prison, and if he found some of the brothers to be unreachable. Comrade Mafundi, a true organizer and people's leader, said he never found anyone who was unreachable. He pointed out the fact that the movement is in a weakened state today, but there's always another battle to take on and structures to rebuild and strengthen. During his entire testimony, you could hear a pin drop in the auditorium. So dramatic and moving was his story. When finished, the audience gave him the tribute of sustained applause, and he left the witness stand to handshakes from those present. And Mafundi was my dear comrade, an extraordinary soldier for our people there in Alabama. He was later framed up and sent back to prison. That happened because of his organizing work after he left prison. He organized the first, with the African People's Socialist Party, he organized the first African Liberation Day mobilization in Birmingham, Alabama, and perhaps in the state of Alabama. And he was the main organizer for the African National Prison Organization that the African People's Socialist Party had pulled together alone because the different Black nationalist organizations who had first committed to the project bailed out. And you know, we've come to understand that the class question is a primary basis for that. Mafundi, though, I just wanted to point out, he traveled all over this country with us, helping to build African National Prison Organization. He was a genuine hero there in Birmingham, Alabama. And his wife and children are still there, and they are still supporters of the movement, and they still help us to do things to keep Mafundi memorialized. If one day had condensed so many aspects of our people's oppression, exposed so many aspects of our struggle for liberty, excuse me, comrades, I don't know what this is. My throat. If one day had condensed so many aspects of our people's oppression and exposed so many aspects of our struggle for liberation, from healthcare to the prison system, to the military, to the schools, it was simply evidentiary overkill to conduct an entire second day of hearings and testimony. In fact, however, many days could be conducted of this tribunal, and it could be convened in every Black community in the country and have lines of our people waiting eagerly to present testimony. And I should say, for the next 11 years, the African National Reparations Organization, which was formed a day after the day after the conclusion of this tribunal, right there in New York, for 11 years in different states around the country, the tribunal hearings occurred around reparations. This is how we began to spread the reparations demand beyond the narrow ranks of Black nationalists, et cetera, and help to move it into something that was the custody of the people, and challenge that notion that had been presented to us before, that the demand for reparations was something that was being fomented by a lunatic fringe. That's how the demand for reparations had been characterized up to the time where the party took it out into the world and make a mass issue. The second day of testimony at the International Tribunal on Reparations for Black People in the US opened with an explanation by the People's Advocate, APSP Chairman Omali Yeshitela, of the historical brief which was being presented to the international judges. This historical brief, 58 pages long, was prepared under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party to summarize extensive research on the history of stolen labor and wealth from African people in the past 400 years. The brief looks at three historical periods: chattel slavery from 1619 to 1865, Southern peasant labor from 1865 to 1945, and urbanization and proletarianization of the African domestic colony from 1945 to today. And today was in 1982. The research explained in great detail how the primitive accumulation of capitalism was carried out on the backs of African people and the colonization of Africans in the US. How that so-called primitive accumulation provided the basic wealth of capitalism in every period in history. And in fact, the amount of wealth extracted from Africans has increased over the centuries. This research has proved that even by conservative estimates, African people are owed $4.1 trillion by the US government for stolen labor alone. Of course, we understand better now the extent of value that has been stolen from Africa and African people, and $1 trillion doesn't even begin to come close to what is owed us. But it, as I mentioned, was the first time it was ever quantified. We'd hear Black people who would make statements like, well, we built this country, etc., and which was true. I mean, that was something that was obvious. Anybody who knew anything about the history of our Africans' relationship to the United States and to other parts of the world, that the economy was built on the backs of African people. It's never been translated in that fashion. And, the African People's Socialist Party, did understand this and we've come to understand more than that, that the whole process of the development of capitalism that Karl Marx referred to as primitive accumulation, which he characterized as having the equivalence in political economy, the same equivalence in political economy that original sin has in theology, the starting point. This is what started all. When he talked about how the capitalism came about as a consequence of turning Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of Black skins. He was talking about, when he called it primitive accumulation, that's how he characterized it, he was talking about colonialism. And colonialism is the foundation of the whole capitalist system and not the other way around. And that's really important for us to understand if we want to get to the essence of this contradiction. That's what this tribunal helps us to do. It brings out the actual documented empirical data, the evidence of the nature of this relationship that we have and how the whole system came into existence. That's why we say it's a horrible understatement when we say $4.1 trillion, or what we've heard most recently by some folk who now include more than just slavery and other elements. They say that something like $14 trillion, even that doesn't speak to it. But what we did do here was began the process of quantification. We say, this is what you owe us. We said 400 years is too long to owe anything, anybody. This was done as a part from our perspective in the party to take African people off the defensive. Here we are oppressed. Here we are exploited. Here all of our resources stolen from us and used against us on a day-to-day basis. And then we get blamed for our own oppression. And we are told that the white people are suffering because they have to give stuff to us that they call welfare, et cetera. And so what we do with the tribunal is help the African population come to understand that it's not we who have lived off the welfare of white people in this country have lived off the welfare of Africans for 400 years. That was a powerful tool in the arsenal of the struggle for our liberation and to help African people. It raises the morale of African people. Now we have a better understanding of our poverty, the poverty of our children. We do not accept the colonial definition of our reality as one that we imposed on ourselves. You hear that all the time coming from some Negro leaders. Some of them call themselves Black nationalists and other things that somehow we bring it onto ourselves. We are responsible for it. And so this is a part of the significance of the tribunal that we just did. So we said that following the historical brief, Kwame Brathwaite of the Patrice Lumumba Coalition and the African Jazz Art Studio came forward to present testimony on the theft of African culture. Kwame Brathwaite, by the way, was the younger brother of Lombe Brath, who was from the Patrice Lumumba coalition, who based in New York for a long period of time, and one of the important figures in the struggle for national liberation, who kept Africa before the people for a long time. So Kwame came forward to present testimony on the theft of African culture. Brother Brathwaite reviewed the capital offenses that were committed by the Europeans in kidnapping African people. He pointed out that the kidnappers did not just take laborers, but also scientists, teachers, and people's healers and leaders. In other words, they stole the culture by attempting to destroy it in Africa and outlawing the practice of African culture in the Americas. In addition, this is something that people should really understand. We've come to despise labor in many ways, even though labor is the basis for producing and reproducing life. Everybody engages in it, and it's never been a bad thing. It's been the only thing that has really separated us from other animals. But what has happened with the capture of African people and the forced labor, the enslavement, the humiliation, the degradation, the slander that was imposed on African people was the slander on labor, because we were the critical laborers. So the slander that was imposed on us was a slander on labor, which is one of the reasons you see that in the United States, there's a hatred of the whole notion of being part of the working class. Because to be part of the working class was to be part of the niggers, to be an African thing. That's who we were. And so they have this discussion about the middle class, et cetera. And in fact, if you were white and were not well off in the United States, then in my youth, you were characterized as trash, white trash. So white trash was that sector of the white population that did not have the same standards of existence as ordinary white people. So labor was really, really something that was demeaned conceptually inside this country for a long period of time. But the thing is that when Europeans went to Africa and began this process of kidnapping us, they were doing targeted strikes. They went to the place that's now called Sierra Leone because they needed people who knew how to do rice, who could grow crops of rice and what have you. They kidnapped people with an African and sometimes entire what we characterize now as communities of African people in Africa who had certain expertise, certain skills, who knew how to do things. For example, most of the whiskey during the era of slavery in the South were produced by Africans who were enslaved people, because we've read since then there was some special process that Africans use to create it. I mean, Jack Daniels is an example of that. It's a whiskey that they say right now was an African who did that. George Washington had his own African who ran the distillery there, who created it. And so, part of what they did was to really go and take African skills and expertise and what have you. That's what they were kidnapping. And sometimes they took professors and they took forces who might have been philosophers and other things and put them to labor as well. And it was more than labor. That's a poor discussion, a poor description of what was imposed on us by imperialist white power, where they would literally work human beings to death like beasts. It was the bestialization of African people. And when I say a bestialization, I mean something more than just labor. When we talk about a beast that's distinguished from human beings, we're talking about an animal that has little consciousness, that can't make predictions, that can't say, this is what I want to do, and then set out to do it. But it's somebody who is enslaved by basic kinds of needs. I need to eat, I need to sleep, I need to make children, babies and things like that. And this is the cycle of bestialization, so that you don't have a long-term view. It's a matter of survival every minute, all the time. And this is what happened to African people. That's not labor. That's something else. That was the bestialization of African labor, if nothing else. And so this is a part of what has occurred to besmirch the whole idea of labor and make it something that even Africans, I mean, in my lifetime, going to school in elementary school, I just remember how, and in my communities, the ideal was to get the hell out of a process where we were outside working for the white man, that we to be able to work inside was a critically important thing, to distinguish ourselves from these human beings who would catch the buses when you could ride the bus, you know, dirty from labor and things like that. That was something that the African, even in elementary school, you were being taught that you didn't want to be in that place. So this was a whole slander of labor, when the slander of labor was a slander of African people, because Africans and labor, that was a synonymous term. That's who we were. We were the laborers. We were the ones. That's why this whole notion of the working class, the white working class, is almost funny, because when they say work, they mean one thing. When we see work, there's an entirely different thing that's meant by that. So anyway, they wanted more than just laborers. They wanted us to provide for them in 1,000 other ways. And so this is what Comrade Kwame Brathwaite was talking about. And so he says, in addition, African cultural expressions such as jazz, blues, and other forms have been taken over by white capitalists, and even Black practitioners dependent on white promoters, club owners, and record companies to make a living today. Moreover, these capitalists set the terms for the type of culture that comes out, suppressing such rhythm and blues songs as Unity and Wake Up Everybody and Don't Call Me Brother, while promoting contentless words like I love music. He called for Africans to seize back our culture and develop self-sufficiency so that we can build our own national identity and struggle. The next witness called was Penny Hess of the Committee in Solidarity with African Independence, a North American white woman who was called to give testimony on the political stand of the white working class and the potential for international solidarity between African and North American people. And the Committee in Solidarity with African Independence was a temporary formation that the party pulled together at a time when we were experiencing some struggles with the African People's Solidarity Committee, and it didn't last that long. We fixed the problem, and the African People's Solidarity Committee came back into existence. So we talk about Comrade Penny Hess, and she gave testimony on her work over the last years in the campaigns led by the African People's Socialist Party, which called on solidarity and support from the North American population, including the African National Prison Organization Solidarity Committee and the Desi Wood Support Committee, as well as solidarity work for the International Reparations Tribunal. And when we say North American population here, we're talking about white people. And the reason we use the term North American, it should not be confused with the assumption that we are talking about somebody who is the legitimate custodian or owner of this land that has come to be known as North America. When we talk about North Americans, we're talking about the state. We're talking about how the state is characterized by peoples around the world, even within what is now called the Americas. So we did that and do that because we really are struggling to give a political definition for the relations that we have, and to make it clear that we are fighting against a particular state entity. We are fighting against a condition called colonialism. And all of what we call the white people are actually colonizers. They are settler colonizers as far as the indigenous people are concerned, and they keep us locked into a process of domestic colonialism. So sometimes it's clear that when we use terms like somehow the white people and we're the Black people, et cetera, it's something that helps to obscure the reality that we are talking about different peoples and representative of different national entities. that Africans are a nation of people who have been forcibly dispersed around the world and separated from each other. And we are fighting against a state power. And that state power is recognized by peoples around the world as North America. That's the state. That's not a geographical territory. In fact, many of the people who live within the boundaries of this hemisphere who talk about America are offended by the fact that the United States, of people who live in the United States, will refer to themselves as Americans, and not considering the fact that all the whole stolen territory is recognized as the Americas. So this thing about America that is used in this fashion, it really obscures political relationships that exist between peoples. And so we said North America. She's a North American woman, which means that she is a citizen of an imperialist North American state. Africans are not citizens. We are subjects. We are colonial subjects of this state. So we really fight to raise up this understanding so that we're not trapped with this racialized definition of reality that does not lead us to conclusions, except if you're fighting against racism to make white people like you more, as opposed to if you're fighting against colonialism, means you're fighting to take your life back, your reality back, to control of yourself, have your own state power, your own self-government, etc. So anyway, back to Penninghurst on top of page 17. She brought out the basic truth that African people are colonized inside the US, and therefore provide a buffer for the North American working class, since the brunt of the attacks and exploitation from the US government is aimed at the African community. For this reason, there is no progressive movement possible in the United States without solidarity with the struggle of Africans for independence. In order to go beyond a cynical bargain with the capitalist class for the division of colonial spoils, North American workers must have the courage to build a strong solidarity with the African people's demand for reparations. In giving thorough testimony on the real class interests of North American workers for revolution and the reactionary choices that have so often been taken by North Americans because of the material benefits they derive from colonialism, Comrade Hess strongly exposed the international importance of the African anti-colonial struggle. And that's a really important statement that we're making here in the Burning Spear newspaper, describing this conference. There's some things we would say a bit differently today, but essentially it's all sound. And we think is important when we talk about this issue, because that we have these people call themselves Marxists and Black nationalist Marxists and things like that, who muddy up all the waters and they haven't had an original thought since they even began reading Marx or listening to people talk to them about Marx, because they have not been able to apply the science that Marx himself really forwarded of investigation and analysis that's called historical materialism. And historical materialism is not reading and saying Marx said this and Marx said that, but it gives us the weapon to investigate and interpret the reality that we're living in, so that we're not reliant like Christians on a biblical verse or something to that effect. We have possession of our own brains. And so this whole notion that somehow that one of the former basic lines that we would hear all the time about how the white workers are duped, and that's the basis for their collaboration with their ruling class, is because they have been duped, because they're somehow been fooled and stupid, etc. And we say that white workers, what we call white workers, they're not uniting with their ruling class because they're stupid. They're uniting with their ruling class because they're smart, because that's the basis of all the wealth they get comes as a consequence of what they steal from Africa, African people, from the indigenous people upon whose land they live, from the peoples around the rest of the world who provide them the foods that they find in the local supermarket. They don't have to be rich to have that, but they can find food in their supermarkets that come from places around the world where the people who pick the food, who grow the food, and who send it here can't afford it themselves. So this is reality for ordinary white people who are colonizers in the United States and other places around the world. And that's part of what it is that we've been bringing out for a long period of time, and what Comrade Penny Hess was addressing with her presentation. And so we say here, while the African struggle for independence has so often been betrayed by North Americans, sometimes especially by those who profess to come forward to give solidarity to our struggle, the honest and courageous testimony of Penny Hess was a welcome expression of solidarity. She was questioned at length by the international judges to learn of the kinds of US state attacks the solidarity movement has suffered, the efforts that are being made to win North Americans to solidarity, the way the Solidarity Committee takes on the political expose of the so-called multinationalist leftist organizations, and how reactionary movements in the white community are being countered. The next witness was Afeni Shakur, Tupac's mama, a former member of the Black Panther Party in New York, who was jailed and tried in the Cointelpro-led Panther 21 case in 1969, 1971. You know, Cointelpro, the counterintelligence program, initiated one of the counterintelligence program, the counterintelligence program that was initiated by the FBI, which is the domestic political police in this country. And there are other counterintelligence agencies that cooperate with the FBI, and that was cooperating with the FBI even at the time people became aware of the Cointelpro program that Comrade Afeni will talk about. In fact, there's a good possibility that the reason we know about Cointelpro specifically is because the intelligence organizations decided to kick the FBI under the bus, and the FBI may, as a part of the so-called intelligence community, may have even volunteered to play that role, while the CIA, various military intelligence organizations, the NSA, and a host of others intelligence organizations were involved in suppressing the struggle of African people here, just like they were suppressing the anti-colonial struggles throughout the world. So the next witness was Afeni Shakur, a former member of the Black Panther Party in New York, who was jailed and tried in the Cointelpro-led Panther 21 case, 1969, 1971. She is working now in the Grand Jury Project to counter US state attacks on African struggle. After pointing out that she was testifying not as an expert, but as a victim of Cointelpro, Sister Afeni proceeded to give the most detailed account of the functioning of the US government's repressive apparatus against the Black liberation struggle. She expressed that the Cointel program of the FBI is a military operation with specific functions, goals, and objectives to neutralize a hostile people's movement. Because of the mass resistance of Black people in the United States, the US government has murdered thousands of our youth and attacked our community, which resulted in such change in statistics as the fact that the New York prison population was 30% African in 1956 and is 80% African today. That's in 1982. And struggling to free such political prisoners and prisoners of war as Sundiata Acoli, Geronimo Pratt, Sophia Bukhari, Dhoruba Moore, Herman Bell, Noor Washington, and Anthony Bottoms. The Black movement has been trying for a long time to gain international support and awareness. The only international examination we have been able to get was from Amnesty International, which issued what was called the Proposal for a Commission of Inquiry on the Effects of Domestic Intelligence Actions on Criminal Trials within the United States. And this is important because some people have said how the Black movement, Black people have, got sorry and lazy and just don't respect, like other people, the question of political prisoners and prisoners of war, which is inaccurate. The fact is that the government assault on the Black liberation movement was not like some assault on some white thing. You know, even people who call themselves white activists and who went to jail and were characterized as political prisoners. You see these guys, you know, who've done things like bomb this and that and kill people, etc. They're out. Many of them are out of prison. And I'm not suggesting they shouldn't be out. They shouldn't have been in the first place, because as far as I'm concerned, it was imperialism that started that war with oppression. And so people responded to it. But what I am saying is that the struggle of African people for self-determination is the fundamental kind of question. And that, you know, that is the critical question for the liberation, not only of African people, but oppressed peoples in this country and around the world. So Comrade Afeni brought out information about some of the most notorious traitors and informers our movement has had to deal with. For example, Gene Roberts was a New York and federal government informer when he worked with Malcolm X, and even acting as his bodyguard and pretending to give Malcolm mouth-to-mouth resuscitation at the Audubon Ballroom when he was assassinated in 1965. That was Gene Roberts. You've seen the pictures. That was Gene Roberts. Roberts then went on to infiltrate the Black Panthers, using his credentials as a trusted security cadre for Malcolm X, and set up the arrest of the Panther 21. Likewise, a security cadre in the Chicago Panthers, who set up the murder of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, was a pig named O'Neill, who supplemented his informant's pay with armed robberies he was never prosecuted for. When asked by Ladipu Solanke of Barbados, who was one of the judges, how she suggested we keep informers out of our organization, Sister Afeni replied, and I quote here, "I can't give the last word. I can only give this word. But it is really my opinion that in reality, this is not something that can be prevented. That in the history of any people's liberation movement, I do not believe anyone has ever been able to eliminate this possibility. By the revelation of these things, people are made to be more careful. But my whole point about the case of Gene Roberts is that I'm not sure how much more careful anybody could have been around that particular person. And that to me is a great example of how, even though most people should remember how paranoid the Panthers were, people would be searched before they could come in. And when someone would be speaking, there would be people here on all sides. But in fact, what I've found to be true is that there is no way to prevent infiltration. What we have to have as our priority is, first of all, we have got to know that we are fighting a just war. We have got to know that our struggle is just. We have got to personally and individually be moral people. We can't be corrupt, you know, because it's in the areas of corruption that we are most vulnerable. It is our areas of weakness where we have vices that we are most apt to be corrupted and thereby subverted. So for each of us, each one of us, that is serious. We just really have to be a moral people. Not that we should not be concerned about agents, you know, but I know for me, I'm sure that I come across agents every day of my life. And the only defense that I have is that I have made up my mind that I am going to fight this until it's over. And nobody is going to intimidate me and get me off my point. And then after extensive further testimony covering the current grand jury investigation investigating the Brinks expropriation of last year and the attacks on such freedom fighters as Sekou Odinga, Sister Afeni entertained more questions. International observer Ike Mfoli of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania asked about the Panther community programs. He said, "It is clear the methods used here are the same as in South Africa, with the goal of the total physical liquidation of the movement. These are not short-term, they are long-term goals. Therefore, we should also accept that our struggle is a long and protracted and arduous one. I would like to ask what happened to the Black Panther Party programs that built the mass movement, programs which were also adopted by the Black consciousness movement in Africa, and which today gives a mass base and ongoing strength to the struggle. He described how the dual power institutions, we call them dual power, that's not it, how the dual power institutions of the African population in Azania were inspired by the Black power movement in the US and the Panther Breakfast for Children program, medical clinics, etc. And these dual power institutions allowed the African struggle to maintain continuity, to produce new leaders when Steve Biko and others were murdered. Sister Afeni responded that it is one of the sorrows of my life that we lost those programs. We don't do it enough and as forcefully as we should. She explained how the African revolution requires both a strong community institutional base and the capacity to defend it. The Black Panther Party was overwhelmed by a massive military assault, but the Black movement continues to build all levels of the struggle. So it is now 9:01, and Comrade Sister Director Agitprop Akili Anai probably wants us to pause here. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Thank you. Thank you for this incredible study again into this book, Reparations Now, and just definitely looking forward to the republishing of this book in 2021. So yeah, we're going to now open it up for questions from our online viewers on Facebook and YouTube. And we did have some questions from last week, Chairman, that I'll also be taking first, and then we'll get into the questions that come in today. And before we start, I just want to acknowledge where people are watching from. We have St. Louis, Missouri, Birmingham, Alabama, occupied Azania, South Africa, Richmond, Virginia, Frankfurt, Germany, Columbia, Missouri, St. Petersburg, Florida, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Battle Creek, Michigan, Detroit, Michigan, Chicago, Illinois, Calgary, Canada, Tanzania, Brooklyn, New York, Atlanta, Georgia, Wichita, Kansas, Avenel, New Jersey, Goodwater, Alabama, North Dakota, Newark, New Jersey, London, UK, Namibia, Lakeland, Florida, Kuwait, Boston, Massachusetts, Pinellas Park, Florida, and Toronto, Canada.
Uhuru.
True. All right.
May I say this question that Afeni spoke of, being one of the Panther 21, we knew some of these comrades very, very well. And we worked with some of these comrades, even in the state of Florida. And we mentioned Geronimo Pratt, who, to my surprise, even told me that he had been a member of JOMO, the organization that we had built, and that he had joined it coming through Florida at one point. But and you talk about Afeni and Mfuli from the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania about institutionalizing the presence of the revolution, which is extremely important. And I just wanted to mention that one of the things that we're doing in St. Louis, Missouri, at this point, is that we have purchased and have finished working on a fourplex that's attached to a program that we have in St. Louis, a kind of that's associated with our Uhuru, what do you call it? A cafe and a food production project, and we've purchased a huge space that's in the process of renovation, and there we're going to have a workforce program for Africans who are coming out of the prison system, where these Africans become a part of the movement in their community. They have an opportunity to learn the whole skills associated with food production and what have you. And we've got this fourplex that will house the men and women, some of the men and women who become a part of this workforce development program. And we've named the fourplex, the four of the different apartments attached to the fourplex for political prisoners. You know, Afeni Asada is one of them. And, you know, there are others who is named for, and the entire fourplex itself will be named. You've mentioned the Birmingham and other places in Alabama. I talked in this process about the Atmore Prison Organization, and how the entire fourplex will be named for Comrade Mafundi Lake. I just wanted to say that. I mean, these comrades, they, as far, it's part of the whole process of offering continuity for struggle, and that our people need to be able to see that and find that from generation to generation. Of course, this should be the last generation ever having to go through this, but I just wanted to make mention of that. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Thank you so much, Chairman Uhuru. All right, so getting into our questions from last week, we have a couple. One came from Comrade Alex Morley in the Bahamas, and he asked, how important is Haiti and reparations for African people in the Caribbean?
Yeah, that's important because, and I'm glad Comrade Alex, by the way, is the the Caribbean regional representative of the African People's Socialist Party, the African Socialist International. And he is responsible for working that entire region. And right now he's working with a regional committee that's comprised of Africans from Bermuda, from Bahamas, and from Guadeloupe, among other places. And so Haiti is in that area. And Haiti has suffered mightily it's just suffered mightily. And so the question of, was it around the question of reparations for Haiti that he raised?
Yeah, it was around questions, reparations for Haiti and African people in the Caribbean. Yeah,
that's a critical question, because a problem is that our folk have been separated, and so you've got a few million people over here in Haiti. You got less than 1 million people in the Bahamas. You got less than I think even less than 250,000 people in what might be called Bermuda, and so you've got these little pockets who, when trying to struggle around these questions separately, don't have the ability to have the voice heard effectively. And even when they get heard as voices coming from separate entities. That's why the question of consolidation of the African Socialist International and that region. And I know there are things like CARICOM, the Caribbean Economic Community, but this is a revolutionary project. This is the project that could have come from revolutionary forces who are in the Caribbean. And so reparations is a critical issue. And for our whole people, the question of Haiti, I think, is central to that issue. And in 2010, after the earthquake in Haiti, that happened in January of that year, the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations, at our first conference that consolidated that organization, that gave it definition and form, resolved to go to Miami to respond to that earthquake that killed, I think something like 300,000 of our people there. And we had a mobilization in Miami in a heavily Haitian populated sector. And with the demands that we put forth were reparations. And reparations from France, who forced Haiti, with the assistance of the United States and other imperial powers, to pay reparations to France for the theft, for the theft of French property, which was the Africans ourselves who, through the Haitian Revolution, became free. And Haiti was forced to pay, and pay for almost 100 years to this lousy, stinking, foul, chauvinistic, piggish entity that calls itself France. Then, of course, there was the United States, which has had this historical relationship to Haiti as an oppressive and exploiting force, but which actually invaded Haiti with the Marines and stayed there for something, I think, like 14 years. And when they left Haiti, they had actually robbed the banks of Haiti, taken all of the gold reserves from Haiti and brought it to the United States. and they've kept Haiti as starvation, and Haiti has become symbolic of that whole resistance, and for many reasons, and not the least of them being, of course, that it was the first successful slave revolt in the history of the world, and the first workers' revolution in the history of the world. And it was a bad example for everybody who wanted to maintain slavery. Haiti is just such a magnificent symbol, and it's been overlooked by African people, or in many ways, Africans from Haiti who came from Haiti directly or who live in Haiti are slandered by other Africans who have taken their cue from imperialism, including those on the other side of that island, the Dominican Republic, who butcher Africans on a regular basis. So Haiti is certainly Haiti. The reparations question is fundamental. And we want the US to pay Haiti. We want France to pay Haiti for the years of robbing and looting and stealing from our people there. And the reparations issue in the whole Caribbean, much of which has been denied the ability for any kind of production for our own lives, instead have been established as means by which we entertain white people who come to the Caribbean looking for sometime obscene pleasures and as places where they store their stolen money offshore. And so reparations for the Caribbean, reparations for Haiti is critically significant. And not just reparations for the corporations that exist in the Caribbean, but reparations from the countries and governments that have participated and function as the backbone for that, and that have been benefited and grown as a consequence of what has been stolen from Haiti and the Caribbean. It's a critical question, and all Africans need to be. That's why the African Socialist International is so important, because it brings all Africans together, and so that these Africans in these islands don't have to try to take on this struggle by themselves, because it needs to be known that when you attack Haiti, you attack Africans in Haiti, you attack Africans in the Bahamas, then Africans in France, where that has grown so rich of Haiti, Africans in the United States and African other places will respond in some way to deliver consequences for what you're doing to our people there. Uhuru. Thank you, Brother Alex.
Uhuru, thank you, Brother Alex, and thank you, Chairman, for that answer. Looking at, again, still last week's questions, we had a question from Marcus Louison, who asked, I love the point of, this is again regarding last week's study, I love the point about Michelle Obama, most fail to recognize the complicity. How do you assess her role in pacifying the masses as her husband wreaked havoc domestically and abroad?
Well, you know, I mean, they were partners in crime. There's no way you can get around that. There were a lot of people who once said, oh, Michelle Obama's this and Michelle, you know, is different, you know, and they did the same thing with Trump's wife, you know. The fact is they're partners in crime. If she was able to look at him without vomiting, you know, she, you know, apparently got in the bed with him, and, you know, because they made babies and stuff together. So this is not some innocent bystander. And she's a very smart woman. I've always thought she was smarter than Obama. I've heard her speak before. She's a very smart woman and who's voluntarily assumed that responsibility. There's one person who is supposed to be one of our leaders. I'll never forget the time when we were criticizing Obama in a very serious way. That's, you know, and this comrade said, well, he was forced to agree with what we said about Obama, but he just really liked Michelle because she had nice arms. I mean, what kind of statement is that? And so it just says something about the low bar that has been established in what's supposed to be a Black revolutionary movement, a Black liberation movement, that somebody would make a determination that somebody was all right because they got nice arms, or somebody was all right because they smile, etc. But you know, Michelle is with Barry. I mean, I don't make that kind of distinction. And I'm not just saying that just because they're married. I'm saying that because she has not made a break. She has not made any public statement in opposition to the fact that the Obama regime upped the bounty on the heads of Assata Shakur. She hasn't made any kind of statement in opposition to Obama's declaration that the misery of our people in Africa is due to the corrupt leaders, or that the misery of our people in the United States has to do with Black fathers not taking care of their families, without saying a single word about the condition that was imposed on us in Africa and inside this country. So I haven't heard anything that would make me think that Michelle was anything different from the guy that she lives with and sleeps with, and you know, I don't know whatever else, you know. I haven't heard anything. I have to assume that they're partners. And Obama might be the minor partner in that, Comrade Marcus.
I heard, Chairman, and thank you, Marcus, for that question. And so we'll take one more question from last week, which came from AG on YouTube. That's their username. It says, Uhuru Chairman, what do you think of a plan/program that can utilize the concept of gentrification, but is only accessible by Black and Brown people and only in urban neighborhoods?
Well, first of all, there's no way you can use the concept of gentrification to your own benefit. It's like this whole notion that somehow you take over the imperialist state and you know, you use it for your benefit. You can't. You got to destroy it. You got to crush it. You got to wipe it out and then replace it. And the concept of gentrification presupposes, and it is a process by its very definition that is designed to remove our population. It comes from, if I'm not mistaken, England, where the gentry, that's the upper class, would come into other kinds of working class communities, or poor communities, et cetera, and take them over. And you know, this thing that we're talking about, we call gentrification, been called all kinds of things in the past, urban removal and et cetera. And if you look at what we call gentrification, you can see that the history of this, the United States itself is a product of gentrification. Ask the indigenous people who've been pushed off their lands into these concentration camps called reservations. You know, look at Africa and see how white people and everybody, not just white people, Chinese, everybody come, they take our Africa, they build it up and make it uninhabitable for the Africans ourselves and what have. There's no way it can work for us. This whole thing, what has to work for us is we have to engage in a process that's designed to negate the power and the influence of the colonial capitalists, whether they come in white face or some other face. So that's not going to work for us. And why even bother with that concept? You know, why not call it what we have to do, and that is to have liberation become self-governing, the whole thing to become self-governing. So that's my view on that, Carmen AG.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. All right, so we're going to get into questions and asked this morning. And the first question came from Comrade Tafari McGarry, who's the chairman of the party in Occupied Azania, as well as the National Director of Organization for Africa. And he asked, Uhuru Chairman, what does getting reparations under capitalism mean in terms of imperialism paying? What does it mean? Is it sustainable?
Let me just say this, Comrade Tafari. One of the things that really distinguishes the party's view on the reparations question is our certainty that the capitalist system cannot survive a successful claim by African people for reparations. We say that the reparations is a function of the revolution, that ultimately what it means is that African people ourselves would take back what belongs to us. What's helpful with the reparations demand and the making it a universal demand of African people, it puts the whole national liberation movement in that common trajectory, moving toward reclaiming African resources. Now, the extent to which this moves in the direction that it has to move for our freedom will depend on what you, Comrade Tafari, and what I do, and what people who are part of the advanced detachment of the African nation, the working class. We have to take it beyond where those who would be satisfied with becoming comfortable slaves. Our objective has to be to destroy slavery. So slavery is founded on the ongoing continued immiseration of African and other around the world. And so we would thrust as much as we can the African people and others in this process of taking back the resources but it's necessary for the revolution, the revolutionaries, to lead the struggle, to take it where it needs to go. So we want everybody to say reparations, reparations, reparations. And we, that is to say, the advanced attachment, those of us who are leading this struggle have the responsibility of taking it where it needs to go. And at the end of the day, reparations will be the expropriation of the colonizer. It will be taking back everything that belongs to us as a people, as a class. That's what it has to mean. So, Comrade Tafari, I know the kinds of issues that we grapple with around this question, but I'm glad you asked me that, because that's what I would like to clarify, Uhuru, and I hope that was helpful.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Chairman Tafari, for that question. Before we get into the next question, I did just want to acknowledge where some other locations shouted out: Oakland, California, San Diego, California, Hempstead, New York, Kenner, Louisiana, Australia, and Bermuda are also with us. So our next question comes from Dennis Knowles, and Dennis Knowles, it's like a long comment, but it goes into a question. During it says pale-faced peoples, but during white people's assault on the United States Capitol building on Wednesday, January 6th, a white terrorist approached a Negro cop and asked the Negro cop, "What do you think would happen to your people if your people were approved reparations? What do you think we would do," meaning white people, "if reparations was approved for you? Although I am inclined to believe that this beast is hard pressed and will not relent reparations to us. Chairman, in a most sobering fashion, what do you imagine would happen should we, the colonized people, get reparations, as this may result in an all-out race war?"
Well, the race war is already there. And the problem is that, for generally speaking, we are unorganized and in some ways unarmed. And when I say unarmed, I'm not talking about we don't have a lot of well, not a lot, but few Africans who wear black uniforms and march with guns. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking armed philosophically, armed strategically, organizationally, and what have you. And the real reparations demand is going to come as a consequence of our strength and not our weakness. So when we talk about what would happen, it would happen because we are stronger than we are now. And of course, what is going to try to undermine that process is the bourgeoisie. I have no doubt about this. At some juncture, in some ways it's already doing that, will offer what they call reparations to a sector of the African petty bourgeoisie in the form of some kind of new poverty program or something like that, and say that this is it, we've done it for you. But for us, reparations is not just going to come through the efforts that we organize. I mean, the reality is that when that African who is too busy trying to get resources in a resource-starved African community that contributes to the horizontal violence that we see in our communities at the moment, that armed person in our community recognizes that his food is in the refrigerator of somebody right across town. His resources are over there. That gives a political direction and definition to the action of those persons, and the entire African population will be mobilized to take back what belongs to us. And this is the part of the struggle for reparations that's going to make a difference. So reparations will not come to us if we're weak. Reparations, what appears to reparations, will come in order to keep us from gaining strength. And so I'm not concerned about what the white people would do if we get reparations, any more than I was concerned what the white people were going to do if you get the right to vote, or if what the white people are going to do if you get this and that. White people will do what they will do depending on how strong we are to carry out our mission for our liberation. To the extent that we are confused around that and spend all of our energies trying to make white people like us, and the so-called struggle against racism or something to that effect, or just running around chanting Black Lives Matter when obviously it doesn't matter, because if it did, they wouldn't be shooting us down in the streets or holding us on our necks with their knees on our necks. To the extent we do that kind of stuff, then we're surrendering. That's why this struggle, this line struggle, this political struggle against these obscenities that call themselves the Black movement that runs around talking about Black Lives Matter and hands up, don't shoot. To the extent that we surrender to that kind of nonsense, we surrender our struggle and we disarm our people. So they will not do anything different than they're doing now. And the problem is what they're able to get away with now, not after we get reparations. So what we have to do is fortify ourselves, our communities. We have to become politically and ideologically clear, better organize, come into the part of the Uhuru movement. We have to organize in our communities. And that means you got to know your neighbor. That means you got to have these discussions with people and there needs to be alert systems that are created. Even the horizontal violence that happens in our community can only happen because of disorganization in our community, ideological weakness in our community, political weakness in our community. And this is the profound task that we have before us. So the achievement of reparations is going to take a lot of work to get strength and not surrendering to much of what happens to us. Comrade Dennis. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman, for that answer. And thank you for that question. Our next question comes from The Last African on YouTube, that's their username, asks, Chairman, what does the current situation in their government, I imagine this means the US government, tell us?
What does what?
What does the current situation in their government tell us?
Yeah, it's a real statement of crisis. It's one that we should celebrate, we should welcome, because it's not holding together. They got a real profound contradiction there. It's our contradiction to the extent that we are not organized, Comrade Last African, but they have a real problem. I mean, they got a problem here where, again, there was something like, 74 to 75 million white people. The second highest numbers of votes that ever happened in a presidential election in the history of this country was got by Donald Trump. And 57% of the white people in this country united with Donald Trump. They voted for Donald Trump. And that's what it is, that we're looking at. And then you've got this fractured sector that works for another sector of the Democratic Party called, for the ruling class, called the Democratic Party. And so they engaged in this contest. Two sectors of the ruling class engaged in the contest for control of the state apparatus. And the state apparatus, by the way, is that which opened the door and let those white people into the Capitol at the same time when you can't march in your community where you are located right now. You cannot organize 18 Africans to march on that city hall without seeing more cops come out to deal with you than what you saw happen at the Capitol with those thousands of white people there. So these elections are contests, nonviolent contests for control of the state. But that contest was not resolved with the election of Donald Trump for a number of reasons that we don't have time to go into right now. So you've got this majority of white people, you got a sector of the ruling class that relies on uniting these Africans and Mexicans and people who are not white to work for white power to carry out what we assume to be our own interests as African people. And the white people hate that other party because they assume that it's your party. They assume that Obama's party is your party. They assume that the thieving criminal Biden party is your party. And to an extent they're right because of the party, the Democratic Party has the loyalty, 25% of the base of the Democratic Party are Africans. They are not African international. They are not the members of the African People's Socialist Party or Uhuru movement. They are united with Biden. That's part of our contest. Our contest. We got to resolve that. And I think we are resolving that. So here's what you got. You got Trump who could not, because of how the whole system is set up, could not certainly capture control of the state apparatus through the electoral process. And so he unleashed all of the white people. And white people historically have been an extension of the state, of the US imperialist state. That's what the lynching of Black people is. That's what these mobs of white people, they come out and harm us. That's why the slogan, the cops and the Klan go hand in hand, comes from. Because the white population has been a part of the capitalist state as it has emerged in the world. That's what taking the land of the indigenous people, kicking the Mexicans off their land, terrorizing African workers and people, etc. That's another expression of the state apparatus. So they got a problem because those white people attacked that, and you saw those little protectors of democracy running for their lives, leaving security documents and everything just to protect their butts. And now you got a ruling class that has to be really concerned. It has to be concerned because one, you got those white people came back. I just looked in on the news that one of them came back to Pinellas County, which is the county I'm located, right? I say one. That's the one they identified for that's something they got to do something to. But they all over this country. And so just because they didn't succeed and they didn't have a clear mission, the military didn't join them, the state apparatus didn't come completely over to their side, so they didn't overturn what they have now, it ain't over. And they are still out there. And so now the ruling class has this problem. One, they got this mass of white people, the majority of whom apparently believe that the election was stolen from them. That's what Make America Great Again means, Make America White Again. That's what Trump was about. And so you got a huge sector of the white population that is convinced that the election was stolen from them. Who stole it from them? Well, you can say Biden, but Biden stole it for who? For you. And for other people and for other people, took it from the white people. So they got this problem. They got a problem of Trump, who is now being characterized as insane, crazy, out of touch with reality. He was more in touch with reality than any of these other clowns have ever been. He knew this white population. They were never able to correctly define what was going to happen in the electoral process, and Trump had it spot on. And he moved this white population in a way that we haven't seen. But that's a crisis. So they got to do a couple of things. They got to figure out how they can do something to Trump and his followers. They have to do that. And they have to do that because peoples all around the world experience this thing, and they need to have confidence in the government. They have to do it because the bourgeoisie, the corporations, the ruling class itself has to have a sense, at least at this point, that there's going to be some stability for the economy moving forward. And that's something that's totally uncertain as long as Trump is out there. That's why the bourgeoisie moved to disarm Trump. They took away the Twitter and they took away certain other instruments that he needs to be able to go directly to masses of people, that allowed him to go around the New York Times, to go around the Washington Post, which are all obviously sectors of the bourgeoisie that's aligned with the Democratic Party and even the Wall Street Journal. So that's the problem. How do they take that on, knowing that without enraging, and do they take the risk of enraging this mass of white people and the conclusions that come to? So this is something they have to try to weigh, because they need to be able to do something with the Trump phenomenon. And then, of course, the other side of that is whether or not they have to try to back off and come up with some kind of deal to keep Trump silent. So you have people who are talking that tomorrow, filing what do you call it? Impeachment articles, talking about getting Pitts and the cabinet to say he's crazy, 25th Amendment of the Constitution, which if they can get either of those or both of those things happen successfully, that would mean that Trump can't run for office again in 2024, which is another outstanding factor that's trapped many of the Republicans, white people, the ruling class servants who call themselves Republicans, are made timid by the possibility that Trump is going to be another factor, an ongoing factor inside the electoral arena that they have. They got a problem. And their problem should be, it can't automatically be translated into a weakness or strength for us, but it certainly has opened the door for a number of reasons. One, many African people are intimidated about doing some things, even if they're not aware of it, because of the apparent strength of the United States government, the stability of the United States government, the fact that it's going to always be here. But there's evidence now that it is not strong, it is not stable, and it might not always be here. Therefore, I might be able to listen to what Comrade Akili Anai is saying in the Burning Spear. I might be able to listen to a Black Power 96 radio station or a presentation that's being made by somebody that questions this legitimacy, say, come on, join the right organizations. There's a real tenuous situation, but it's up to us to make this turn out to something that is favorable to us as African people. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Wow, Chairman, thank you so much for that answer. That was really powerful.
That was from the last African on YouTube, right?
Yeah, that was the last African on YouTube, yes.
Uhuru.
Uhuru. All right, our next question comes from Comrade Nasir Alamin in Kuwait, and he asks, is it being suggested that Biden will introduce new domestic terrorism policies? What are the chairman's thoughts and any lessons learned from the Cointelpro program that can be applied now to this potential Cointelpro 2021?
Well, first of all, it's never ended. Cointelpro, that term, that thing is, maybe gone. But as we know, even this black identity extremist is something that when they floated it out there in public, you can be sure that we've been identified. There is a plan to deal with us. They'd be crazy if they didn't have that plan, if it wasn't at work. They'd be crazy if they didn't have informants and snitches and things like that in our organizations or somewhere in our midst to try to keep us off balance. And so that is something they will cut off our ability to have this discussion with you, Comrade Nasir, in Kuwait. That kind of thing will happen. And there's going to be, I believe, some movement to try to use what happened with Trump as the basis of denying various kinds of rights to everybody else. And they're going to be doing that while fighting against Trump. You got to remember that even before this thing with Trump, that sectors, especially of the liberal bourgeoisie and the state apparatus itself, was claiming that anybody who was saying that something or that Africans had a problem in this country, Mexicans had a problem, the indigenous people had a problem, anybody who was raising that, really, it was the Russians. It was the Russians on social media who was saying that there's no real legitimacy to this. It's the Russians trying to undermine, quote unquote, our democracy. I think we're going to see something possibly happening like that around this thing with Trump. And so this move to try to protect the state, protect the institution of the government that many people can agree to because of what they saw happening there, I think will be used as the basis that they can get away with it of attacking the African revolution. I expect more moves of censorship to keep us from being able to communicate with each other. And I think we'll see more ideological assaults, because what is happening, Comrade Nasir, is very clear, is that the anti-colonial politic of the party has got so much traction now. And people are looking at the only way forward. And we've been providing that not just in the United States, but around the world. So more and more Africans are looking for solutions of African coming to power. This is a contradiction that they have to try to deal with. And this is one of the reasons that Biden has created a cabinet that he calls Looks Like America, so that he can have these little components of neo-colonialism, what do you call it? Sectional neo-colonialism, division of labor, with somebody from the indigenous people who are living in these damn concentration camps. Now she's in the cabinet. I think she's over the Department of Interior. They got somebody over the HUD. I mean, they got Black people, Africans, and all these other people who are there that look just like those of us who are being oppressed around the world. I think that's part of what their job is. But I believe that the struggle has gained so much traction, and that the internal contradictions of the system itself is going to make it difficult to do everything that it needs to do. And third, I think that the ideological clarity on our part will not create unnecessary enemies for us, because we ain't telling white people you gotta like us, and which is they found extremely oppressive, or that you gotta like anything that we like. We don't give a damn if you like us or not, and that we move all of the muddiness, all of the stuff out of the way, so that people can come to clear understanding of what is in their material interest. And if you look at the call that we made through the Black is Black Coalition for the November mobilization that just happened in Washington, D.C., subsequent to the election. You read that call could direct it to African people, but it speaks to issues that everybody in this country is dealing with, even people who were driven toward Trump because the bourgeoisie cannot solve their problem. We live in a country, where they sell what they call healthcare, in the same way they sell automobiles and refrigerators and what have you, not cause you sick. And you can't get an automobile or a refrigerator if you ain't got no money. And the same thing is true with healthcare and everything else that people need. And people are catching hell, and they are being driven by their stomachs and pocketbooks by the deep and profound political backwardness that you will find in America and places like America, like Israel, South Africa, et cetera, of the general white population. That's what's propelling them. We can engage them, and we have to engage them. And I don't care whether people like white people or not. I don't want anybody to be harping on me about whether I like white people or trust white people. I got a strategy here. I trust the strategy, and I want to clarify what the contradictions are, so that everybody with the potential of uniting against this ruling class, everybody with that potential can lock on to the trajectory that we established and win independence, freedom, and the destruction of capitalism from the African People's Socialist Party. Uhuru, Comrade Nasir, you always make me work hard, man.
Uhuru, Chairman Uhuru, Comrade Nasir, thank you for the question and thank you for your response. We are winding down with the time, and we have we still have a lot of questions and big questions too. So will be good to take a look at some of those next week. The next question comes from Comrade Tacharo Masimba, and he says, thank you for clarifying that the term North American describes a state, not a geographical territory. I'm always a little uneasy when using terms like white community, Black community, and Black St. Louis, where he's from, etc., that we often use when making local mass struggles. I don't want to legitimize white settler colonialism by using such terms. Any thoughts on that?
I think it's right on. I mean, that's the question. We're really struggling for clarification. And the work that you're doing, Comrade T'Challa, you and Comrade Kalambai there in St. Louis it's a part of the process of political education for the masses of our people. That's why we have to break through against these neo-colonial puppets. And calling them puppets, of course, is not exactly accurate, though they are that. They are, what they have this thing called artificial intelligence that white people have, really created. And I think that's what you're looking at when you're looking at the kind of people that you're running against there, who they're protecting their system, and who can be self-motivated, self-activated by what is perceived to be their own interest, which just happens to align with the interests of the ruling class of keeping us locked in this place. So that's the struggle. And obviously, is something that we do, in a way that is aware of where people are politically at the moment. It's an ongoing process of education. And sometimes you can make great leaps in what you're able to call on the people to do based on how things are moving in the world. We know that we're living at a moment now where history is compressed. And what it used to take like 10, 15 years. I mean, it's been 3 generations, Comrade T'Challa, 3 generations just about since the defeat of the Black Revolution. And the African People's Socialist Party has been fighting to bring the conscience of the people up to a place where we can start talking about revolution again. And we have done that. Of course, we have done it by becoming accomplices of history, which itself is really acting, in these political arenas that we are talking about. So, we have to do that. And that's why we talk about the clarity, helping people understand this white people, Black people thing. It undermines the whole question of national identity. What is a Black person? What is Blackolia? Where in the hell is that? Can you identify that with the nation that we are part of? So that's the kind of thing that I think is really important. And I think you're extremely good at helping to clarify in these local struggles that we're involved in. And we have to be conscious of trying to do that. Again, sometimes, we'll say something interchangeably with the purpose of helping people to come to a better conclusion about what we are talking about, because sometimes, even sometimes when we say Africans, people in the United States will think that we're talking about somebody on the continent of Africa, because we've been robbed of the memory of our connection in many ways. And so we work it and try to help people come to the best conclusions. And history is helping us too, because the fact that we're at another time in history, similar to what we saw in the 60s, similar to what we saw with the Garvey movement, when the white world is saying, you are not us, you are not us. And when it's becoming clear that it's more advantageous for us to be who we are, because all of the wealth that keep white people fat and rich, that keeps them suffering because of deprivation of that wealth now, it belongs to us. So I want to identify with those resources. And every time we've seen the struggle in Africa, for example, strengthen and become significant in the world, Africans in the United States are more likely to be able to identify as Africans. It's just when we're getting our butt kicked on the continent, then we become Negroes or something else again. So it's a really important struggle to the kind of political education that we provide all the time, Comrade Chichawa. That's what we're engaged in doing. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Comrade Chichawa, and thank you, Chairman. And I'll go ahead and take this last question. This comes from Comrade Connie in occupied Azania, South Africa. And she asks, Uhuru Chairman, how does one go about the reparations question in occupied Azania, where white settlers are proclaiming war when the land question is raised? What more about reparations?
Well, that's the truth. And particularly the African petty bourgeoisie, and then especially as it represents itself in South Africa, this artificial entity that was created for our oppression, really smothers the actual relationships. I mean, that's what they call South Africa, so-called rainbow nation and what have you. It's a rainbow, but the sun never shines in the shanty towns where we live and the townships that we inhabit and what have you. It's just the worst kind of a poverty, et cetera. So our struggle is to organize the people who are most victimized, who are most obviously. That's why Comrade Connie, like the work that we are doing in the townships in occupied Azania, the work that we're doing to win masses of our people to different conclusions, and even not accepting the definition of those Africans from Zimbabwe who are living in some of the worst kinds of shanties over there near Alexandria, bringing all of these forces into struggle. This is where the core of our revolutionary movement is going to come from. These are people who are less confused and even if they are confused, they don't have a material stake in the status quo. And a lot of people who don't actually have access to the material assets that's stolen from Africa and from us there, expect that we are going to get it one day. We got, I've forgotten the percentage of college and university educated Africans in occupied Azania who can't even have a job. But they do such a job on us in terms of convincing us that a part of this rainbow nation, that one day, as the petty bourgeoisie, that if we are latched on to that, we can be benefited by our own oppression. So one thing I'm saying is, Connie, we have a lot of work to do in providing political education and organization to the masses in the most oppressed communities. And I've seen you, and I've seen videos of you working with those comrades. You're on the right track. And the fact is, what I've also seen is at times of crisis, even though it doesn't seem like it at the moment, the work that we do, political education, agitation, propaganda that we provide in these hardcore oppressed communities, even though it doesn't seem like it at the time, at moments of crisis when the people strike out and they recognize that they will recognize our leadership and they will expect us to take them the way forward. That's going to happen to you too. And I think to some extent you already see it happening there in occupied Azania that they call South Africa. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, yes, I absolutely unite, and thank you to Comrade Connie for that question. And Chairman, I want to go ahead and now give it to you to give us our closing remarks before we go into our announcements today. And of course, appreciate you for another dynamic study. So Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru, the thing I would say, Comrade, is the study we are dealing with now in terms of the Reparations Now, that abbreviated discussion, the little book on the first tribunal in the world, the International Tribunal on Reparations for African People. It is a part of the whole process that we have been working on for a long period of time now. That is to become a self-governing people under the leadership of the African working class. The African working class who made that tribunal happen. It was the African working class who brought all of these skills and what have you together, and the people together to have the benefit of this recognition and understanding the reparations questions. The African working class that's propelled reparations at this critical thing. I mean, I went all over Europe the following year, taking reparations to African communities there and to Africa. So the African working class as the entity that has been providing this leadership, and our objective is to govern, is to take control of our lives. And I want to suggest that that local communities, wherever you are, can also begin this process of doing tribunals. There are criminals not defined as crime by our oppressors who do horrible things to our community. Sometimes they're slumlords, sometimes they're cops, sometimes they are these hostile merchants who come to loot our communities on a regular basis. And the people are aware of the crimes and offenses that they're committing against our people. Sometimes it's the local government itself. And to the extent that it's possible, the people should begin to hold tribunals, put them on trial. Let the people come draw up charges against them, put them on trial. Let the people become engaged in this discussion of defining who they are. Take away from them this monopoly on the assumption of bourgeois control of the process of the definition of crime and criminality, et cetera. And because we've always said that law is the opinion of the ruling class, well, the ruling class in waiting is the African working class. And so we began the process of creating these structures and stuff that we are going to use and take names and let them know we're keeping names. We have a whole list of criminals that we are putting on trial and we're coming to certain kinds of conclusions about. That's going to be a really critical kind of thing because they're going to lose and we're going to win. And we need to identify these forces, and to the extent that we can carry out verdicts, we need to carry out verdicts about these forces. And I read someplace years ago that as slavery was ending, and here on the plantations, the plantation owners would look out the window and Africans would be building gallows. You understand? Gallows outside the window for these white people who've been enslaving and torturing them forever. They should be able to see these trials that we are having for them all around the world as the structuring the gallows that will send these forces who are humiliating, oppressing, killing, starving our people to the place that they can't do that no more. So I just want to say that. And thank you so much, Comrade Akile, for the incredible work that you're doing, and all of the comrades in the party and Uhuru movement. It's clear that we have created a foundation from which the revolutionary movement will be moving, from this period. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you so much, Chairman, again, for this incredible study. I want people to know that we will be continuing the study around the book Reparations Now. And we're also going to be joined by some reparations Black Power candidates from St. Louis next week, Herdoja Kalambayi Bentham and Tachara Masembo, who are running for alderman and alderwoman in St. Louis, Missouri. And you can visit and support those campaigns at votemasemba.org and votekalambayi.org. And make contributions to those campaigns, but we will be talking with them next week. So you don't want to miss that study. And I just want to let people know that because of time, if your question was not answered, that we, did make note of it, and we'll take it in the beginning of next week's Q&A portion. This study was brought to you by the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, Winning the War of Ideas. For your revolutionary news and analysis, you can visit theburningspear.com. And for revolutionary radio, dynamic shows, and music by Africans all around the world, you can tune into blackpower96.org, broadcasting out of St. Petersburg, Black Power 96.3 FM, broadcasting out of St. Petersburg, Florida, and accessible via the Black Power 96 app for Apple or Android, or online at blackpower96.org. The theory of African internationalism is a theory of practice. All the energy of the African People's Socialist Party is focused on the destruction of colonial capitalism. Africans of the world, go to our website, apspuhuru.org, and fill out our contact form. You can find that information in the chat box for Facebook and YouTube. Order your copy of Chairman Omali Yeshitela's latest book, Vanguard, The Advanced Attachment of the African Revolution, at burningspearmarketplace.com. If you're interested in bringing fresh food and commerce to the Black community in North St. Louis, you can apply for the One Africa, One Nation Farmers Markets open positions at tinyurl.com/farmersmarketapp, APP. That's also linked in the chat box. By January 12th, the open positions and their brief job descriptions include the From Food Desert to Food Oasis Farmers Market Assistant part-time seasonal position to carry out daily operations of a farmers market, including recruiting vendors and building vendor relationships, assist in maintaining the bookkeeping and records related to merchandise sales, the EBT food stamps program and wireless processing of sales, excellent customer service skills, strong problem-solving skills and experience or ability to learn use of Google Docs, Google Spreadsheets, FarmSpread, and other related software. $13 an hour, hours vary. Also, the Farmers Market Volunteer Coordinator, a part-time seasonal position, responsible for all aspects of volunteer recruitment and training, responsible for recruiting an outreach team of volunteers to promote the market to the community through flyers, posters, and tabling. What's required here, a positive attitude with the ability to use computers and internet for word processing, Google Sheets to maintain volunteers, emailing and posting volunteer listings, $15 an hour. The Farmers Market Promotions Coordinator, also part-time seasonal position, responsible for promotions, marketing, and advertising the farmers market to the community, including a consistent social media presence. Required here, additional computer skills include word processing, Google Docs, email, and internet, especially familiarity with Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and other social media. $15 an hour, hours vary. And the last open position is the Website Coordinator, a part-time seasonal position responsible for developing and maintaining a farmers market website with experience in e-commerce and online platform sales. Requires experience in building and maintaining websites through platforms such as Squarespace, WordPress, Weebly, or Dreamweaver. Experience implementing e-commerce sites and scripting such as Square or Shopify. Required strong problem-solving skills, and $16 an hour, hours vary. So again, you can apply for these positions at tinyurl.com/farmersmarketapp. This MLK Day, support the movement for African self-determination and economic self-reliance by volunteering with the Uhuru Furniture and Economic Development Project of the African People's Education and Defense Fund. On Monday, January 18th, the 2021 MLK Day event and volunteer project will feature historic films of MLK, Malcolm X, and Black Power movements, as well as videos of the work of APDF and the Uhuru movement today. Anyone can participate in the virtual event. In Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the virtual program will start at 10 a.m. Eastern on Zoom, and in Oakland, California, at 10 a.m. Pacific time. After the program, a socially distanced volunteer project where volunteers work in small groups to distribute literature to promote Uhuru Furniture and APEDF. No experience is necessary and training is provided. If you live in Philadelphia, meet at Uhuru Furniture on 832 North Broad Street. Register on Eventbrite at Uhuru MLK Day 2021.eventbrite.com. And in Oakland, volunteers can pick up their materials from Uhuru Furniture this week on 3742 Grand Avenue. If you're outside the Bay Area, there will be an alternative volunteer activity you can join. Register by going to Uhuru MLK Day Oakland on Eventbrite. The Black Power Summit is calling on all African people in North America, the Caribbean, Africa, Europe, and wherever African people are to join us from January 16th to January 24th for a series of regionally specific conferences. The Black Power Summit is completely free. There's only one condition: that you want African people to be free and self-governing. The events will convene on January 17th and culminate on January 23rd and 24th, and the dates in the regions are as follows. January 17th in the Caribbean at 9 a.m. Eastern, and the U.S. Western region at 12 p.m. Pacific time. January 23rd, Europe, 9 a.m. GMT, and the U.S. Southern region at 11 a.m. Central time. January 24th, Africa region at 11 a.m. South Africa time, U.S. Northern region, 10 a.m. Eastern, and U.S. Midwest region, 1 p.m. Central time. And you can register today for those summits at blackpowersummit2021.eventbrite.com. The African People's Socialist Party is inviting you to our second 7th Congress plenary, February 6th through the 9th, 2021, themed African Workers of the World, Unite and Organize. You can register today at apspplenary.org and read the call written by Chairman Omali Yeshitela. And the Black Power Commemoration Committee of New Jersey, New York is selling Black Panther, Malcolm X, Che Guevara pins, watches, and other Black Power memorabilia in support of political prisoners. You can order your merchandise at www.naabpp.org. Half of all proceeds go to political prisoners. Every Tuesday from 9 to 10 p.m. Eastern, join Ralph Pointer on What's Happening Blog Talk Radio. Ralph Pointer is a member of the Black is Back Coalition and chairs the Political Prisoner Working Group. He is a longtime freedom fighter and leads the Lynn Stewart Committee. To tune in via phone, call 347-857-3293. And we are calling on people to follow the All African Peoples Development and Empowerment Project on Facebook, or visit developmentforafrica.org for important information and helpful tips in regards to the colonial virus COVID-19. You can visit developmentforafrica.org for tips, reach their international telehealth program, which they recently just launched, through Project Black Onc, where you can get your COVID-19 related questions and concerns answered by licensed doctors and nurses. And that's at developmentforafrica.org/telehealth. And if you're looking for more opportunities of live political education from Chairman Omali Yeshitela, tune in every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern on the Chairman Omali Yeshitela Facebook Live page and the Burning Spirit TV YouTube page with Chairman's address to the African nation, discussing important topical issues and providing us with an African internationalist analysis. And lastly, to keep up with all our movement events, because we have so many, visit theburningspear.com events page and subscribe to our mailing list. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spirit TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. Uhuru.